Hey everyone. I apologize for the delay in putting some of this stuff up. Um, I downloaded some free software, which is usually a bad idea, I suppose, um, to make sure that I could have the PowerPoint slides and a webcam video together in one place. And I recorded this lecture yesterday and tried so many times to convert it to video and export it and upload it to YouTube and yada yada, and the audio wasn't there. It's been a time. I'm sure that you guys are having your own issues here with this crazy but necessary lockdown here. Anyway, I am going to try this one more time, and I'm going to try to do this in chunks. So this lesson is going to be broken up into a few videos. So for tonight, because it's almost midnight already, I'm going to try to do the first 15 minutes and upload that, and then I will do the rest tomorrow and upload them. Okay. So I'm picking up where we left off, but first of all, welcome back. It's going to be a little weird doing this distance learning thing, but I suppose we all need to get used to it. So I hope you're doing well and staying safe and healthy. We left off last time talking about Homo heidelbergensis, and we were about to get into Neanderthals. So the title here says Homo neanderthalensis or Homo sapiens neanderthalensis. Whoa. That has to do with the species definition, because as you remember, as you hopefully remember, the biological species definition says that a species is a species if it's reproductively isolated from other species, meaning that they cannot produce viable offspring that are also able to reproduce. As we will see later on, Homo neanderthalensis, or Neanderthals, and Homo sapiens did interbreed. So by the biological species definition, it should be one species. But most paleoanthropologists probably would still say they're two species by the ecological species definition. So let's get into it. So here's some of the basic facts about Neanderthals. First of all, they're named after where the first Neanderthal skull was located in the Neander Valley in Germany. Fun fact, in German, Tal is valley, and Taler is like a person of the valley, a valley person, I suppose. So Neandertaler meant a person of the Neander Valley, and that was the name given to this skull and this species. So that's why it's pronounced Neanderthal instead of Neanderthal. But I won't judge you if you say Neanderthal, especially since I won't hear it because we're distance learning. Now, as far as like the span of time that they existed, that earliest date, 127,000 years ago, that is, I believe, what your textbook said, and that is a little bit fuzzy. I've seen other sources that have suggested that they were around for quite a bit, like since earlier than that. But 30,000 years ago is around the last solid date we have for Neanderthal fossils. So that you can hang your hat on, so to speak. Their cranial capacity, which is a proxy for brain size, was actually on average larger than modern Homo sapiens. We don't know what that means. It could be that we just have a really small sample size, and so it doesn't represent the overall variation very well. It could be that because they lived in a cold environment, the thermal output of your brain is quite high, so it might have been good for producing heat, and it might not have correlated exactly to intelligence. Or it could be that because they had stockier bodies, larger bodies in general, even if shorter, that it just scaled up with body size. We don't know for sure, but it was slightly larger than modern humans on average. They had smaller molars. Their incisors were larger, heavily worn, worn in a way that made it look like maybe they were processing things with their teeth. A lot of even modern humans have done that. We have ethnographic examples, we have archaeological examples where people would, process leather, for example, scraping leather or holding something in their teeth while they're working it. And that causes a lot of strange wear on your teeth that's different than when you're just eating something. So they had some sort of material culture, which is obvious from everything else we know. They also had a relatively complex stone tool technology, and we talked about a little bit of that there with Homo heidelbergensis. So Heidelbergensis also used this Mousterian industry that was created using something called the Levallois technique. And that was, again, when you have a core, a giant piece of flint, say, and you're knocking off flakes to prepare the core so that you can strike off a particular type of flake that you then want to process further. So you're preparing the core so that finally you can strike it on a prepared platform, and a flake will come off in a relatively predictable shape, and then you can take that flake and you can work it into specific types of tools. So it took a lot of advanced planning, a lot of technological know-how, and a lot of skill, really. So it was to the next level, and they could make a lot of different tools that way. From everything we know, they likely did hunt, and the animals that they hunted were quite large mammals, elk and things of that size, or larger, for example. And at least part of the time they lived in caves or rock shelters, because we found a lot of archaeological evidence there. A lot of the Neanderthal fossils were in places like that. But that doesn't mean that they only exclusively lived in caves. So this notion of cavemen as being sort of the earliest human-like creatures is misguided. We know there were lots of hominin species before Neanderthals. Neanderthals were really recent in terms of evolutionary history. But one of the reasons that they lived there is because it was protected from winds and cold. And, when you're inside of a cave system, things tend to stay at a pretty regular temperature. If you've ever done any spelunking. If you haven't, I recommend it. So here are some of these Mousterian tools. You can see there's like different shapes, and if you didn't know what you were looking at, you might not know that they were all tools. The one on the left over there is clearly something that would be used, for example, for a spear point, perhaps for cutting, maybe for digging, but probably for a spear point. Some of the others are like scrapers or flint knives. This dark sort of black one there in the middle, it probably could have been used for multiple things, one of which might have been to kind of drill holes in leather. I'm just extrapolating here, but they made tools for different purposes. So morphologically, how do we tell the difference between Neanderthals and early modern humans? So for one, they had this long brain case. Sometimes I think I do too. I don't know if you can see it here. So maybe I'm 100% Neanderthal and I just don't know it. But anyway, they had these sort of oblong football-shaped heads, and they had a receding forehead, whereas like for modern humans, it's like a pretty broad, tall forehead relative to Neanderthals. They had this supraorbital torus, which is different than a brow ridge, because like the earlier species we were talking about, this torus of bone, this sort of cylindrical projection of bone, is something you could really like grab with your hands. So it was pretty big. They had a large nasal cavity, and we don't know exactly what that means. There are hypotheses out there. One of the hypotheses is that because they lived in a very cold environment with dry air, they needed a larger nasal cavity to warm up and humidify air that they were breathing in before they took it into their lungs. So actually, we all have these little coils of bone that are called nasal conchae in there, and they're wrapped with like mucous membranes and lovely things like that. And that's one of the functions of it, is it humidifies air and warms up air as you're breathing it in, and probably traps particles that you don't really want to breathe into your lungs and things like that. So they had a large nasal area. We don't know for sure if that's what it was for, or if it had more to do with genetic drift, or if it just scaled up with everything else. They also didn't really have a chin. Again, Homo sapiens is the only hominin species that actually has like a projecting chin. And again, I know I'm not the best model here. I'm not a Henry Cavill type character with a big bulky chin, but there is a chin there, I promise. But theirs just kind of sloped back kind of immediately. They had an occipital bun. So the occipital is on the back of your skull here, and this bun was like a dinner roll attached to the back of the head. It's like a part of the topography of the skull that you could almost like grab again. So in terms of their bodies, they were shorter and stockier and very muscular, and that is actually an adaptation to a cold climate. So there are these two rules that are more like patterns that we see often with mammals. They don't hold quite as well for modern humans, although they still do because we have clothes and technology. But mammals in colder climates do tend to have these shorter, stockier, more compact bodies, and that's because that type of body shape, it decreases the ratio of surface area to volume. So the volume of your body, the inside where all the internal organs and muscles are, and your brain and so forth, that's where all of the heat is generated from, right? Cellular activities, and really, organs like the brain that just eat up a lot of energy, right? Like a computer, when it gets hot. And you radiate skin from your surface, right? From the blood vessels and arteries and capillaries, especially that are close to the surface, you radiate a lot of heat away. So if you can minimize surface area while maximizing volume, you can conserve heat better in your body. This other rule that goes along with it is called Allen's rule, and that just says that in colder climates, mammals tend to have smaller, shorter appendages, arms and legs and so forth, ears, nose. And, if you've ever noticed in the cold, your nose and your ears are some of the first things that get cold, your fingers, your toes, right? These things that stick out because the blood has to travel outside of sort of the core of your body, and the further distance it has to travel, the more heat can be radiated away. So in colder climates, it's beneficial to have shorter limbs. You can see here with these cute bunnies, little bunnies. I like to show cute furry mammals in class. So on the left, you have a desert hare that has these really long ears, really long legs, relatively short fur, is like kind of just tall and skinny. And then this snow bunny, I don't know what the technical name is, has shorter ears. It's like sort of fatter and shorter and compact, and it's got all this fur, and it's just better suited for a colder environment. So we know that Neanderthals did display some behaviors that we would typically think of as human. There have been sort of burials, quote unquote, that we found, like this one that's on the screen here. And whereas if you didn't bury your dead, first of all, it would be less likely to find preserved bones because scavengers would take them. They would be all displaced. They would get weathered more quickly and so forth. But at least in some cases, it seems that Neanderthals placed their dead in specific positions, like a fetal position or curled up somehow, in places where they would be safer from the elements. I don't know if it's this particular one, but there is an example of a Neanderthal burial where they did some analyses and they found pollen from flowers, and they thought, oh, whoa, they must have placed flowers on the grave of the deceased. Later on, a study was done that showed that in that particular cave or wherever it was found, pollen could blow in very easily. So we're still unsure over whether that was intentional or not. They also made some jewelry. So you could sort of file this under art or symbolic human behavior. So they would prepare some jewelry, maybe necklaces or things like that out of shells, for example, and they would use this pigment ochre, sometimes maybe in their burials. It's a reddish, earthy pigment. So they did have some degree of symbolism. There's also a question as to whether they had language. So we don't know. We'll probably never know. So there's basically two components to being able to speak. One is being able to articulate your tongue, having a tongue, musculature of the tongue and control of muscles of the mouth and the throat so that you can make a lot of different types of sounds. And that's not as easy as it seems. If you've ever tried to teach a dog to speak, which I have, they can try to approximate you a little bit, but they can't really articulate with those snouts and their tongue and things like that, right? They can't make all the full range of phonemes that humans can. One of the anatomical parts that's necessary for such a masterful control of the tongue as humans have is the hyoid bone. The hyoid bone is located in the throat. It's a very small, delicate bone. And it actually is the only bone in the human body that does not articulate or touch in a joint or something like that with another bone. It actually is held to the rest of your throat with ligaments and tendons and musculature. So if you compare the modern human and the Neanderthal hyoid, they look quite similar in morphology as compared to the chimpanzee one, which is quite different. And the hypothesis is that the shape of the hyoid and the places where the tendons and muscles attach allows for better control of the tongue and speech. So the other component to speech is being able to process the symbolism of speech, right? Being able to understand what a certain set of sounds mean and being able to draw from that pool of sounds to construct meaning and also process things like maybe tenses and who knows what. And of course that happens in the brain. And one gene, and for sure this isn't the only gene, it's not like, the gene for language is probably not a thing, but one gene that contributes to the ability to speak and understand is this gene called FOXP2 that's located on chromosome 7. It turns out that Neanderthals, because we were able to sequence the genome from some DNA that we got from Neanderthal bones, that allele that they have is the same allele that we have. And we know that that's necessary for speech because there are some families who have an allele that is mutated, so it's kind of broken maybe, and people in those families that have inherited that allele have trouble either processing speech or maybe they have trouble, I can't remember which, they might have trouble articulating or putting their words in the right order. So that gene is important in language. Sexy time. I put that on there because we now have evidence within the last 5 to 10 years that modern humans, and by which I don't mean contemporary today humans, but anatomically modern humans and Neanderthals did interbreed. Because after we sequenced the Neanderthal genome, we compared it to modern human genomes and we found that, whoa, there are little sections in modern human genomes that are that seem to have come from Neanderthals. And they're at varying frequencies around the globe. Now, up until very recently, we thought that Neanderthal slices of DNA were found in all populations outside of Africa. So So individuals indigenous to, whose ancestors were indigenous to regions outside of Africa, at frequencies between 1 and 2-ish%. And the thought was that modern humans interbred with Neanderthals somewhere in in Western Asia, in the Near East, because of the patterning of the frequency of Neanderthal DNA in modern human genes. However, recently we discovered that, in fact, indigenous populations in Africa do have some Neanderthal genes. I have not scoured this article, so I can't tell you if there's like a north-south sort of cline in the frequency of Neanderthal genes or the amount of Neanderthal genes in modern humans in Africa. But the working hypothesis is that came from humans moving back and forth between Africa and like West Asia, for example. So probably the interbreeding did happen in West Asia, because Neanderthals so far have really only been found in West Asia, maybe Central Asia, and Europe. So probably after people interbred with them, over generations, people were moving back and forth into and out of Africa, and passing on those genes. There are some other relatives of ours around this time. We have Denisovans, who are so called because they are from Denisova Cave, which is in Siberia in modern Russia. But you see there, it's in sort of Central Asia, Eastern Central Asia, if you will, like right in between Kazakhstan and Mongolia, where we found a molar and a little tiny part of a pinky. Maybe we found a little bit more, but that's basically it. And we were able to extract DNA. Now, let me just go back for a second. In this same cave, they found in different layers, at different time periods, they found modern human remains, they found Neanderthal remains. So they were able to sequence the Denisovan genome from, I think, this little pinky bone. And they found, lo and behold, modern humans do have some of that as well. And strangely, even though the Denisovan genome, or the Denisovan fossils, were found in sort of in Russia, that's in part of like Central Asia, the populations that have the highest frequency today of Denisovan genomes are in Oceania, in Australia, in New Guinea, in parts of Melanesia. Strange, because we've never found any Denisovan fossils there. It could have been that humans interbred with Denisovans kind of on their way down that southern route towards Oceania, or it could just be that there's more Denisovan fossils to find and we just haven't found them. There's also Homo naledi that was found recently, and these fossils were discovered in South Africa in 2013, and they were in a cave system. So some people who were just recreationally exploring this cave system, they came upon some remains that they thought, oh, these might be human, and they reported it. And so some anthropologists at the university decided to check this out, and they found that some of these parts of this cave system, like in order to get to these fossils, you would have to crawl through such a tiny, narrow space, such a narrow space that it makes my hands wet just thinking about it, that they needed a team of scientists who could fit through this, really. So they put out an ad, and they found some people who were able and willing to do this, and they went in and excavated it, and it turned out that I believe it was an all-female team of scientists who did this. And there were several individuals that they found there. And these fossils were interesting because there were several individuals. They had a very small cranial capacity. So going back smaller than Homo erectus, right? And that was a long time back. That was like 1.8 million years back. They had a mix of ancestral and derived traits. So You know, they had some traits that you wouldn't expect in a more modern hominin species, but they did have some that are more human-like. So the assumption was this must be a really old species. It turns out this context was really hard to date, but when they finally were able to find a way to date it, and I'm not sure exactly what that was. I think they might have dated some stalactites and stalagmites using some radioisotopes, but the date came back to be around 250,000 years ago. So this overlaps with probably Neanderthals, Homo heidelbergensis, and possibly even some of the first modern Homo sapiens. So this tree, this family tree of ours was very tangled. And it wasn't this straight linear line of evolution going to us. Oh, you know, there were lots of different kind of variations. So I'm going to pause this here, and tomorrow I will put up probably 2 more videos that cover the rest of this lecture. Okay, so stay tuned. By the way, when I say tomorrow, I mean Tuesday. It's almost Tuesday already. So stay tuned, and I will put up more as soon as possible.